Okay, so today we're talking about some of the challenges of delivering temperature-sensitive medications. So I'm sure as you're aware, many medications require some kind of cold chain storage and delivery, whether that's many biologics that require storage in the fridge, or as we've seen with some of the more advanced therapies, the mRNA, COVID vaccine has been a great example, requiring -80 freezers to transport and deliver them. And so one of the ways that this is been tackled historically to get therapies out of the fridge so we don't need that cold chain is lyophilization.
So with lyophilization, you're essentially creating a dry powder which is stable and then it can be reconstituted at point of use, being mixed into a diluent. Great idea, but quite a few challenges, which mean that administering this in a home setting, for example, is quite challenging. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the solutions that exist today to overcome some of these challenges?
Sure. So if we're trying to move these types of therapies into more of a home environment, there are a number of devices that exist already that are trying to automate some of that process. So can we take this kind of relatively complicated process of mixing fluids together, reconstituting the powder, checking it's ready for injection, and doing that injection? So many of these devices at the moment are all based around kind of dual chamber syringes, where we've got a kind of a dual stopper arrangement that allows you sort of in one continuous stroke, similar to a standard auto injector, to deliver that. That works relatively well. These devices are, they're not quite as simple and straightforward as some of the existing devices. Maybe a classical auto injector device, you have more user steps, but for certain types of therapies, they work really well. However, if you've got a therapy that's more challenging to reconstitute, that's where it becomes a little bit more interesting. These are kind of quite sort of one-shot devices. You don't have an opportunity to sort of continually agitate the fluid or really increase the rate it's diluted. So I don't know if there are maybe some other considerations that we'd need to consider if we're going to try to fully automate this process and maybe apply it to some more challenging formulations as well.
Absolutely. And actually, that's a really good point you raised, because ultimately, if you are a drug manufacturer, you want to make sure that you don't have a different device for every single drug, because obviously that makes it quite burdensome, not only from a production perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. Speaking specifically about device challenges, I think the other kind of things that you need to consider are things like the overall size of the device. So if you're going to have the device use its own energy to mix the fluid, then you need an energy source. So that needs to be thought about. That adds to the size. You need to think about the containers you're using. So you'd want to make sure that your device is compatible with off-the-shelf solutions, for example, vials. You want to make sure that from a regulatory standpoint, you've got the bases covered. For example, there's a regulatory requirement that the user must be able to see that that complete mixing has happened. And the idea is that the user should be able to use this device with minimal effort. I think we can certainly go a long way towards resolving at least some of these challenges to remove some of the friction in the currently accepted processes. Can you tell us about some of the challenges around kind of fill and finish and using standard packaging, and how we might overcome some of those challenges?
Sure. So a lot of the systems that are based on sort of dual chamber syringes, that's a relatively complicated process to be able to fill, to lyophilize, and to integrate that into devices. So there's not a tremendous amount of capacity worldwide for doing this type of approach, which is a challenge that needs to be overcome if this is going to be more widely adopted. But one of the ways that that's being considered is people who are looking at saying, well, actually, instead of using these sort of more specialized primary containers, can we use a standard primary container and maybe pass fluid between two chambers in the device? Can we do the mixing maybe somewhere else in the device in a separate component? And that might alleviate some of those challenges by using more standard packaging for other elements of the device.
So Matt, based on your experience, what do you think the ideal solution is? What do you think the market will head to in the future?
I think there's a real opportunity here if we're going to design a device that is truly patient-centric, that can really help the delivery of some of these fantastic new therapies in patients' own homes, doing something which reduces the complexity of administration. There's a sustainability benefit to taking things out of cold chain, which is something we're seeing more and more effort and energy being put towards. And I think that these types of delivery devices that can remove the requirement for cold chain storage are going to be a component for that. But I think some of the challenges that are going to have to be overcome are, can we do this in a way which is intuitive and usable? How can we automate some of those steps, and how far should we automate? How do we balance the kind of complexity of the devices versus the kind of the benefit that they bring in terms of usability?
I think some of the areas where TTP can help are related to leveraging all the expertise we have across a broad array of fields, whether it's kind of from the formulation science through to the physics of mixing, through to the engineering of robust component design, through to the human factors associated with creating a pleasurable and intuitive user experience. I think the amalgamation of all those skill sets can create something that's truly beneficial to the industry, and I'm very excited to kind of see where that heads over the next couple of years.